So again, this session today is about repository adoption and engagement, two very, very important topics. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I am a librarian and I'm an ethnographer. So I have a PhD in ethnography, kind of anthropology, worked in the music field, did a lot of ethnographic work in public and academic sectors. And then after that, I became a librarian. I was an archivist at Yale University for 10 years. And then during the pandemic, I pivoted to UX, where I quickly found a niche in working in knowledge management with UX research, because it's something that's highly in demand with research repositories and so forth. I worked for Thomson Reuters, SAP, a couple of other folks, basically helping them implement different kinds of research repositories. And my approach, as you'll see in this presentation, is very collaborative. It's actually very ethnographic. A lot of times I like to describe it as I research the researchers. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. Please follow me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect. I have some articles that you probably find interesting, in linking out to other things that are super useful in this area. All right, so let's get started. So why is adoption so important? Well, as you know, if you have a research repository already, or you're planning one, you do need to know that adoption and the value of your research repository are very, very closely linked. So the more people that use your repository, the higher its value, right? And impact, right? More frequently they use a repository. And kind of on the opposite side of that, right? If you implement a research repository, but nobody uses it, that's a lot of time and effort that you've spent that unfortunately is kind of wasted. So you really have to make sure that folks are you're in step with your stakeholders and your users of your repository. One thing maybe I'll mention at the beginning is the research operations community did a large-scale studies of research repositories a couple of years ago, and their overall finding was that folks would implement research repositories without knowing exactly what they were wanting to do. As in, what was this repository for? Who was it for? So just throwing that out there, that's a really, really important first step in the process. Okay. So the preparation stage, I'm just going to move this little tab here. There we go. So preparing an adoption strategy. So you do need to prepare a strategy for adoption as you start planning your repository. So the first step, understand the context of implementation, make adoption a part of the planning phase, build to network engagement strategies, and then beyond. So that's kind of a little roadmap view of what a strategy would look like. Okay. So let's start with the first step in that. This is understanding the context of implementation. So in the different companies I've worked with, different people I've talked to, lots of people I've talked to, are implementing repositories in very, very different contexts, right? So first of all, what's the size of your company? Do you have a lot of silos? I've worked for a lot of large enterprise companies in which that's just kind of a standard challenge. And recently worked with my first startup, which was amazing. So I was like, wow, you all, there aren't many of you, and you all work in the same room every day. And those were all that's very different kinds of challenges there. Um, so you need to understand the context in which your repository is being introduced. Now, you could have been at your organization for a long time, or maybe you just arrived there. Um, for me, and I'm just going to insert a little stories in here that will be hopefully helpful. When I came into these bigger companies or any company, uh, as a research operations person, knowing that this was my knowledge management was my responsibility, the first thing I would do is kind of understand the lay of the land. So kind of imagine yourself as an anthropologist, right, coming into a community, right? Every organization has its own culture, it has its own kind of structure. I like to know, who are the decision makers, who are kind of more influential folks. What's that like? Um, what is the knowledge sharing culture like? If you don't know that in advance, it's okay, but you'll find out as you start to progress. Um, so First of all, who are your stakeholders? That's another one of my first steps a lot of times is to make a stakeholder map. So who besides the researchers, I think one of my very first positions was, well, the researchers, we need a repository. I'm like, are you sure you just want it for you? Or do you want, and this was kind of early on when repositories were first taking hold, right? And I think the main concern was we can't find our stuff. So, but it really is more about your stakeholders, right? Who do you want to use your repository? Those are your users and stakeholders. And, take the temperature there. Do they know anything about the repository? Like, what's the status of UX research at your organization? Usually there's um, a lot of visibility issues with UX research. So there'll be, you need to understand what that means. So, how are people feeling about this? Are they excited? Usually researchers are like, oh boy, is there something else I have to do besides my research? I have to enter it into this tool. So if you don't know these things, you need to find them out. And I'll talk about that here. So adoption is make it part of the planning phase, like way before, I was fortunate at my first job to partner up with a UX researcher who was already working on this. And we kind of partnered up and we had a lot of time to prepare, right? We had a lot of time to do this background research. You might not have that time, but you should push for it because if you don't know exactly who your users are and what they're expecting and what they want, then adoption is going to be super difficult. Just like the work that you do if you're a user research, right? User researcher, this is why we do this research. So start raising awareness about the repository. Now, I'll skip down to my pro tip is more often than not, I'll start with like a really simple just survey and ask open-ended questions like one of my favorites is what value would a repository bring to this organization? So letting that sink in there. Questions like that. I love to answer ask these open-ended questions. Not only are you getting a variety of answers and taking the temperature of your stakeholders, you're also raising awareness because they may be like, oh, we're having a repository? Okay, then you don't have to tell everybody. You've already told them using the survey. So I kind of like that way of starting. So make sure you start that early enough in the planning phase. The second point there, super important, especially if you're a team of one, and I know you're here because there were a lot of questions about team of one researcher. Identify those people who can or are willing to help you with the repository. And I tell you, every organization I've worked with has one person on every team who either is really has this knowledge management mindset, or it really annoys them and they really want to do something about it. So identify those people. You can, depending on how your organization works, you can make them into a project team. Be super respectful, of course, of their time, saying like how much time this will take of their schedule. I think at another company that was super huge and many, many silos, I basically grabbed one person from each research team from each LOB and kind of made a committee out of those folks, and that took a lot of chats and coffee chats and sitting out on meetings and things like that. The third thing, set up a communication strategy. So think really carefully about how you're going to communicate to people and keep people in the loop about what's happening. Let's think about the best way. How do we know what the best way is? Well, again, be a researcher. Look at where people hang out. Look at the places where people already communicate. Try not to reinvent a new space that you're going to have to manage. If there's already a newsletter that, ops team or maybe design ops, who are usually super awesome folks, see if you can jump in with them. I usually also contact managers of different teams who have like weekly stand-ups and just pop into the meeting for 10 minutes to talk about it. Just to really kind of get people on board and understanding there, really to, set up different kinds of strategies for communication. Meet people where they are. I like that strategy. All right. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, you're going to build a network. Don't tackle this alone, because usually the road ahead is going to require also a lot of work. Once the thing is implemented, you're going to need help. So really, it isn't a one-person job unless you happen to have like an actual librarian on staff. So again, find out who cares about knowledge management as much as you do and recruit them, to help you. Be clear about the time commitment. Maybe you should think about like what kinds of things you might need help with, whether it's communication or like taxonomy, user journey mapping, all these kind of things. Even interns be super great to bring on because they can help you with the background research and interviewing. And it's very helpful to have in this network a variety of stakeholders, right? So we know, of course, user researchers, but you will find there will be product managers, designers, maybe engineers who will also be really willing, to jump on board here. One of the strategies I like to actually use is if this happens to be your position and you're in a new organization, it's likely that someone's tried to do this before and maybe it didn't work. Maybe it did, and maybe it did not work. So I actually like to lean into those folks and their knowledge of, how things maybe didn't work and bring them on if they want to have another go of it. Sometimes they don't, but, always good to bring in those folks, right? To get in. And then I leave a kind of special, place for the folks that are kind of naysayers about your repository, and there always will be those folks, and if there are decision makers or people that are, executive leadership even, that's a separate strategy, but, that's good to know that you need to also have those conversations. It can be difficult. Okay. So engagement strategies. Okay. Before I get into this slide, I actually want to tell you a little story about my first encounter with this kind of adoption. And maybe some evidence as to why, like, librarians know exactly what you're trying to do with adoption and repositories and systems and things like that. So when I was working at the Yale Library, we had this in-house built, basically it was a repository actually for archival collections. So it was like researchers could come in and see, what they were looking for, different authors or artists or whatnot in these inventories of these collections. We were tasked with rolling out a completely new platform, this open source tool. And so they actually created an agile project team for this rollout. Believe it or not, yes, in higher education, I couldn't believe it. It was an actual agile project team. And we had different like work groups on this team of maybe 30 people. So we had, a communications person, we had a UX person, we had the more engineering inclined folks who were kind of liaising with the folks we hired to do the work. And so, I was the teaching and instruction work group, right? So we had and there was a marketing person as well. So we had all these people who were covering these different aspects of rolling out this new platform, right? This kind of gives you an idea of the scale of work that you're so greatly cut out for right now. And so really my task was to get like 200, 300 library staff members on board with this new system that they didn't want to use, right? So did all these kinds of programs. So funny enough, this was years ago, now doing this kind of same work in the UX space. So I just wanted to tell that story there. So engagement strategies, how can you create visibility, engage colleagues on various levels? As I mentioned a minute ago, jump in with team meetings to present the repository and answer questions. Try to start with questions, right? You don't want people to think that you're coming in with this tool that they're going to have to use, right? The carrot and stick approach. I'm like, can we just file that approach away somewhere and replace it with something else? So you're going to go into those team meetings. Another really great strategy, if you can do it, is run a highly visible pilot project with the repository. I'll give you an example. So at the company I talked about with all the lines of business and work silos, I mean, this was huge, right? All these folks working on different products in their silos. They were not talking to each other formally about their research, just very informally. So the idea was to actually, and some of them actually had their own repositories that were working. But my task was to make, one big one or connect them somehow. So what I did is I surveyed those folks to see, well, what topics do you do research on? Product agnostic. Let's talk about topics. Let's talk about like automation, for example. So I said, okay, I want everybody from all these from all these LOBs and silos to bring all the work that their teams have done on automation. We're going to bring that, send it to me, and we're going to sit in this room and we're going to look at this. And it was pretty amazing because they were seeing like similarities and differences about their approach and how they were doing work. And in fact, this same group at the same company, as I discovered later, not only did they want to share their research findings, they actually just wanted to share their research methodologies through all this survey. I know I'm going off a tangent here, but it's important to know that you might discover something you didn't expect. right? When you start doing surveys, I did contextual inquiry interviews, talking to people, and I found out, hey, they're not, I mean, yeah, they want this repository so they can find everything that everybody does, but they don't just want research findings in that repository. They want to see other people's methodologies, their research questions, their survey templates. Like they just want to see all this kind of thing. So that changed the scope quite a bit of the work I was doing. Okay, the third point here, implementing socialization methods that cater to different stakeholders. Again, whether you're hopping into somebody else's newsletter or creating your own or a Slack channel, again, be mindful of those different kinds of stakeholders and where they hang out and how they communicate. So you may have to have, different ways of communicating with these groups. And then finally, probably my favorite strategy that is just super important is have lots of coffee chats, especially at the beginning, just to get to know folks. I know it's kind of time consuming, but really super important just to develop that trust. When you're presenting something like in a team meeting and you've never talked to anybody on that team and you just go in there blind, I don't think I ever do that. I think I usually talk to someone on that team to know what I should prepare for and the kind of questions I prepare for. So that you just don't walk in there without knowing. And that kind of circles back to that initial survey idea, right? You get a really good idea of what people's roadblocks are with the repository. What are their main concerns? Usually it's like, the time it's going to take me to enter my stuff into the repository, or who's going to have access to the repository. It's usually the same kinds of questions, but you want to see what those questions are so you're prepared. Okay. Yes, engaging with stakeholders. Again, some people will be super excited about a repository and others will be less enthusiastic. So just be ready for that. A lot of times, if that's the case, I like to just open it up and ask questions like, tell me about, ethnographer hat again, tell me about what your pain points are if a repository is not one of your pain points, or something you don't think is important. Again, and plan that approach based on how the stakeholders feel. So I'm really basically telling you to run a research study on your users, which, just to say, as kind of a relative outsider to this field, I found it really curious how many times user researchers implemented a repository without researching their users. Very funny, but absolutely the truth. So don't skip that step, because that's the key to adoption as well. Okay, so you've done all the work, you've talked to lots of people, you've gained their trust. You have that core group of supporters who's been helping you, and the thing is live. Okay. So let's talk about beyond implementation. So obviously, there's a lot of follow-up. When you have a repository, you have, you now are a steward of these knowledge assets, right? This is an important thing, which, executive leadership might not realize this is the case. They may say, oh, you have the tool, or work is done here. But of course, that's not how it works. I'd like to, I guess, as an archivist, I was kind of surprised at the term repository because I don't think it's like active enough. It kind of gives like a very passive uh kind of feeling, but really you don't want that, right? It's not a place. Actually, for archivists, I will tell you, the word repository in archival studies actually means a place. A repository is like, oh, Yale University is a repository for XYZ, which was strange to me because I don't think that's actually what you're wanting here. You don't want a place to put things. You want it to be very lively and engaged. So that's kind of your next task here after introducing the repository. You want to make this plan for consistent adoption. Now, those folks who you had identified from each team, now they become very important. So they can help you, like, tell you how things are going on that team. Are people putting their documents in it? Are they having trouble with it? Are there like any troubleshooting that needs to be done? Otherwise, you are going to be running around a lot, answering questions. Again, keep up good communication, provide support, support and feedback mechanism for the repository, whatever that may look like to you. Whether it's a Slack channel to report things or like office hours every week. And yes, and a lot of folks will too kind of do, this week is new in the repository, maybe highlight a new study that just went into the repository, something to keep people engaged that this is kind of a live system. Even better would be to, I suppose if it were me, I would maybe make a short little video interview with a product manager who just grabbed something from the repository and changed their scope of their work, right? Or maybe they used it in their design, but in any way, that's great because you need to provide that evidence. And it can be tracking, it can be a little difficult. It depends highly on the tool you're using to track. But especially because, we're talking about qualitative research here. So how those folks were used, which is why my mind went automatically to video, right? To someone to, talk about how they used something that they found in the repository. And again, who is using a repository? Ideally, it would be great to know, right? Are they researchers? Are your stakeholders using it? You want something kind of beyond just numbers. What's their role? How often do they access it? What do they search for? How are they searching it? Okay. And that, that goes into kind of tagging and taxonomy, which is beyond our scope today, but interesting to know for me, like, what are you looking for when you go in there? And there can be some really creative answers there. And that last point there, what I was just talking about, what do your users do with what they found or what they didn't find, right? Or maybe they found something and they're just like, this isn't exactly what I was looking for, but it helps me answers these questions. So now I'm going to ask these questions for my research. So you kind of have to dig in a little bit to find out exactly how they're using it. Okay, so yes, obviously preparing and carrying out this strategy, you need to give your repository a strong start, enable success. Now, some of you may be here after maybe you like inherited a repository, or you're like, yeah, but we already have one, no one's using it. What do I do now? And I hope that this information is still helpful for you to kind of, restart or kind of reevaluate. Again, go through those steps, like look at the context, what's happening right now, who's using it, who's not using it. Is there, a problem with tooling? And Again, follow me on LinkedIn. One thing that I am preparing is kind of a one pager for folks to use if they need to get funding for a repository or for staff for a repository. Is just this kind of like a value proposition for knowledge management for qualitative research. Um, I should say, I know this was one of the questions that was submitted, which is why I'm already moving right into it. But I'll just say, if that's you, if you're trying to, garner support for that repository, there is like a whole field of knowledge management and has been around for a very long time. And there's a lot there, a lot of statistics of how important knowledge management is. And like I said, I'm going to be writing up like a one pager. So do follow me on LinkedIn. So when that drops in maybe 2 weeks or so, that you can get a copy for yourself.